It can all get a bit confusing to narrow down the definition of ports, remasters, remakes, and remakes, but now we have a new category of iterative game releases, and that's HD 2D. What does HD 2D mean? Well, you probably already know since you found this video, but I'll quickly define it as a game that features 2D sprites with 3D environments, typically pixelated, and takes advantage of modern visual elements such as real-time lighting effects and camera effects such as depth of field. This style of RPG began with Octopath Traveler, but we've now seen many RPGs remade with this visual style, such as Star Ocean 2, Live Alive, and the recently released Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake. Since we've seen many games get remade in this style to much success, it begs the question, what other old school RPGs deserve to get remade with this treatment? Well, that's what we're here to answer. I'll be ranking the top 10 RPGs that I think deserve this treatment, ranked from least deserving to most deserving. Now, I usually focus on Final Fantasy games on this channel, but in this video, we're broadening the scope to all JRPGs. Despite that, there are in fact 2 Final Fantasy games on this list. Can you guess where I'll be ranking them? And I guarantee none of y'all are gonna guess my top pick, but without further ado, let's begin. So the first game I'm going to mention is actually not part of this list, and is an honorable mention, because if I don't mention this game, y'all are going to murder me in my sleep. And that's Suikoden 2. The reason? Well, because I haven't played it yet. I have played the first game, and just got caught up playing other games and never got around to the second one. Then, Konami announced a remaster of both games, so now I'm definitely just going to wait for that to release, which is coming out in the not so distant future. But it would have been way cooler if it had the HD 2D treatment instead of a simple remaster, right? Anyways, on to number 1, Radiant Historia. Most of y'all probably didn't expect this to be on the list. I remember when Radiant Historia first got announced for the Nintendo DS. At the time, I remember saying that I was sick of Nintendo DS RPGs. I felt like I had played too many of them already, and the Nintendo DS was reaching the end of its life at the time this game released. So I didn't play it right away. I waited a few years, and then I finally played it, and when I did, I was so stupid for writing this game off. This is easily one of the best RPGs of that era, and I really felt like it deserved a bigger budget. I remember seeing how many people were frothing at the mouth over Ni no Kuni on the PS3 at the same time. If Atlus actually released it as a console title, the Western market would have gobbled this game up since it really had a great story. But instead, they released it as a DS title at the end of its life, which is probably why the sales were so low. So Atlus, their infinite wisdom, ported the game to the 3DS, with some enhancements like voice acting. At the end of the 3DS life, when nobody gave a shit about the 3DS games anymore, so it sold poorly again. Atlus. This game is fantastic, and everyone who has played it knows it. There's a new way to give it a third chance, which is to remake it as an HD 2D title. The game already featured 2D sprites with 3D environments, so they could probably reuse much of the assets and then just touch the game up with some real-time lighting and depth of field, and voila! You can repackage this game as a fancy HD 2D remake. And in the modern era, it doesn't seem that game sales drop much as generation leaps get blurrier and blurrier, and many games are released on multiple platforms now anyway, so let's give this game the chance it deserves. Third time's the charm, right? Number 2, Arc the Lad 1 and 2. These games were released very early on in the PlayStation's life. The first game released in 1995, and the second in 1996 in Japan. Let's be honest though, the second game is the real game. The first game is only about 10 hours or so, and is a pretty solid strategy RPG for what it's worth, but the second game plays like a traditional RPG where you get to explore towns and dungeons, but with the combat of a strategy RPG. And if I'm remembering correctly, it took me about 40 hours to beat. So if they did the second game, I mean, they might as well do the first game too then. Not to mention that the second game is a direct sequel to the first game, so there's a lot of reuse of assets that can be utilized. It was a fantastic game that I don't think a lot of people have played, and this was not only innovative with mixing traditional RPG with strategy RPG, but there was something called the Hunter's Guild where you could accept quests. Now, this may not seem revolutionary because every game does this now, but I can't think of a single JRPG that had a quest system like this prior to its release. Remember, Arc the Lad 2 released in 1996, and this series in general needs to come back. Oh wait, I forgot they did bring it back as a mobile game. Yeah, I refuse to accept this as an entry in the series. There's another game from a series where something similar happened as well, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, remaking this game as an HD 2D title would be the perfect way to bring the series back, and if it sells well enough, they could make a new entry in the series. It deserves the treatment. Number 3. Lunar 1 and 2. Yes, I'm aware that they're remastering both of these games, but come on, you know you want them to actually give it proper HD 2D treatment. These games already looked fantastic originally as well as on the PS1, so remaking this wonderful world in HD 2D would probably blow us all away. And for the record, I found these screenshots that a developer made as a mock-up to test HD 2D visuals for a potential game, and yeah, you know you want this to be a playable version of the game. One of the main visionaries of this series, as well as the spiritual successor, Grandia, is Takeshi Miyagi. Not only did he leave the company Game Arts to make mobile games back in the early 2000s, yeah, the dude was way ahead of the times on that, but he also is unfortunately no longer alive. He died in 2011 due to a surgical complication from a brain tumor. So even if you wanted him to come back to make a new entry in either of those series, without him, it probably wouldn't be the same, just as it didn't feel quite the same after he left, and then the company got run into the ground trying to make an MMO out of Grandia that completely bombed. So the best way to honor the classic games he brought to life is to remake both of them in HD 2D. On behalf of Takeshi Miyagi, they deserve the treatment. Number 4. Final Fantasy VI. Now, of course, it would be great if they did an HD 2D remake of all the 2D Final Fantasy games, but that might be an unreasonable expectation. They did remaster all of them as part of the Pixel Remaster series, however, but if I had to pick one Final Fantasy game that would benefit the most of the 2D series to give the HD 2D treatment, it would have to be Final Fantasy VI. It's been a while since I've played Final Fantasy VI, but it sticks in my memory as having some of the most memorable set pieces of the 2D games. Imagine the Opera House sequence, the Phantom Train, or traversing the town of Narsh, all in HD 2D. Well, that last one was already done in HD 2D in Unreal Engine. Shout out to Jason Pelozedge for making it. And I am aware that even though I haven't played the Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster yet, that the Opera House appeared to have some 3D to it from the trailers I saw prior to its release. I say yet, because well, I have a series I call Rediscover Final Fantasy, where I intend to play every Final Fantasy game. So if you want to see my coverage of Final Fantasy VI, then you should hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. There has been some talk of a full reimagining of Final Fantasy VI, and I remember Kitase saying that he keeps getting asked to remake it from other staff members. In other words, Naoki Hamaguchi keeps asking him to remake it over and over and over and... But anyway, he said that because there are so many characters, it would take 20 years to remake Final Fantasy VI, which doesn't really make much sense since Final Fantasy VII has almost just as many if you include Zack and Sephiroth, not to mention if you count Sonon too. But anyways, since they seem to think it would take too long to do a full reimagining of the game, it might be best just to do an HD 2D version of it instead, right? Number 5. Breath of Fire 3 and 4. This is a series that fans have been begging Capcom to bring back for forever now. And they totally listened. See? They made Breath of Fire 6. What, you guys don't have phones?
You guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have
Everyone's got a
phones,
phone.
right?
You can play on your tablet too.
Now, I get that if they were to go full AAA with a brand new Breath of Fire entry, that it likely wouldn't sell enough copies to justify the expense. But with this HD 2D craze, they don't have to. All they have to do is make Breath of Fire 5. I mean, Breath of Fire 6. I mean, Breath of Fire 7, an HD 2D entry. And there's no better franchise to use this style. Breath of Fire 3 and 4 were known for having excellent sprite work when some other RPG developers were leaning into using 3D models at the time. And for the record, I think these games still to this day have arguably the best pixel sprite work and animation of any JRPG. And what better way to test the waters with this style than to simply just take Breath of Fire 3 and 4 and remake them with the same sprites, but with spruced up 3D environments. If they are received well, then they should make a brand new entry in the series using the same style. Number 6. Dragon Quest V. Until Dragon Quest XI came along, Dragon Quest V was my favorite Dragon Quest, and the creator, Yuji Horii, agrees with me. While Dragon Quest has gained more popularity here in the West with Dragon Quest XI, it still pales in comparison with many other JRPGs. After I played Dragon Quest V on the DS, I understood why. It's because they made a huge mistake by not releasing Dragon Quest V in the West when it originally released on the Super Famicom. Dragon Quest V may even be my favorite RPG of that generation. Before I played Dragon Quest V, I wasn't a huge fan of silent protagonists, but Dragon Quest V proved to me that there is in fact a powerful aspect of it. The story follows a single character from childhood into teenage years, all the way up to adulthood, and you even get to decide who to marry and have children with, who then become members of your party. The silent protagonist works because it allows you to project yourself onto the character, and considering how the story is structured, the events of the game feel more personal as a result. Almost as if you're the one growing up throughout the adventure, and that the events are happening to you. Seeing how incredible the transformation was for Dragon Quest III in HD 2D has been, I would really like to see how one of my favorite Dragon Quest games would look in the same style. But there's another Super Nintendo classic that would also look amazing in HD 2D, which brings us to the next game on the list. Number 7. Chrono Trigger. This one is the no-brainer. I'm actually surprised this hasn't been announced already. We're currently living in a world where Live Alive has been remade in HD 2D, but Chrono Trigger hasn't. This is the game that every single indie JRPG is inspired by, or at least it feels that way. Its visual style is one of the elements of the game that has stood the test of time extraordinarily well. Seeing it reimagined in HD 2D would be a match made in heaven. If you need proof, here's a demo of a fan-made project of a Chrono Trigger HD 2D game made in UE5 by Dot. Of course you want to play this. Number 8. Final Fantasy Tactics. Ever since the Nvidia leak years ago, it's been rumored that Final Fantasy Tactics is getting a remaster. However, since it's taken so long, many have speculated that this remaster is actually being transformed behind the scenes into a remake, and likely in the form of an HD 2D remake. It's important to remember to hype responsibly though. It is fun to imagine what an HD 2D remake of Final Fantasy Tactics would look like, especially after seeing the releases of Triangle Strategy. I grew up playing Final Fantasy Tactics a lot as a kid and have some serious nostalgia for this game, and especially for how the sprites look. In my opinion, they could simply reuse the same sprites, but just spruce up the 3D environments along with all of the other bells and whistles, and I would be ecstatic. It's been over 15 years since they released a new version of this game with War of the Lions. It's time they make a new version, and what better way than for it to be an HD 2D game? Number 9. Xenogears. Much like Final Fantasy Tactics, this is a game where the 2D sprites still look great to this day. However, the 3D environments, even more than Final Fantasy Tactics, need to be remade. This is a game that was desperately trying to push the PS1 hardware to its limits and suffers from the jitteriness of those floating point inaccuracies, and walking through a town can result in the game feeling like it's running in 5 frames per second at times. It has imagination though, and the story is one of the most epic stories in all of video games. But there's a reason this game is so high on the list, and that's because of the second disc. You see, this game never got the budget it deserved, and so the developers had to rush the second half of the story. So you get through disc 1, which was about 40 hours long. Then you pop in disc 2, and all of a sudden the game just starts narrating parts of the story to you. I remember being extraordinarily confused about this at the time. This is how they managed to finish the game, so to speak, within their budget. You only get to actually play through a few portions of the story in the second half of the game. It was a real bummer. I understand that it would be a huge undertaking to fully remake this game, but with this HD 2D craze, they could save some money by remaking it in HD 2D, and for God's sake, actually make the second half of the game that we never got to fully experience. This game has such a great story that it deserves the HD 2D treatment for that reason alone. Number 10 is actually 3 games, and that is The Legend of Heroes, the Gag-Harv Trilogy. Why are these games at the top of the list? Well, because they were done dirty. So dirty. We of course never got their original Japanese releases in the 90s, but we did get the remakes that they made of them on the PSP. Except there are a lot of problems with them. The most notable that people will often mention is the translation we received here in the West. It's amongst the worst translations I've ever seen in video games. I mean, just take a look at this line. You would think this would just be a one-off, right? Nope. This is pretty much par for the course on how the writing goes. It was so bad that sometimes in the Song of the Ocean, they'll refer to a young female character as their daughter, even when she's not. Yeah, in Japanese, the same word for daughter can be used interchangeably to also mean young woman. That's how bad the translation can be. But that's not all. The most sacrilege thing of all is something that isn't specific to the Western release. Oh no, it's the battle system. You see, in the original game, you run into encounters on the field, and then the battle takes place on the field. And the battle system is kind of real-time, actually. I've never played it, so I can't exactly describe it well, but let's just put it this way. It's not the same as the PSP versions. And look, I enjoy turn-based combat, but the turn-based combat in these PSP remakes is so boring and so basic that it might put you to sleep. Until I had seen footage of these original games, I didn't realize how completely watered down the combat was in these remakes. And in Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, there are almost no boss fights in the game. I can't confirm if this is true in the original game, but my suspicion is it's probably not. It almost feels as though they deliberately removed boss fights because they wouldn't work in the new watered down combat system. Yeah, these remakes were done dirty. I have this weird relationship with the Gag-Harv trilogy. Somehow, even though the translation was incredibly bad, I still understood 90% of what was happening, and I still somehow fell in love with the characters and story. A Tear of Vermilion in particular had a moment so tragic, I almost cried, and I almost never cry when playing video games. For a game that was originally released in 1996, this is very impressive. These games were way ahead of their time, but these remakes definitely don't do them justice. By some miracle, I genuinely loved playing these games despite all of this, but they're impossible to recommend to anybody because they're almost objectively bad games. But they're all we have as official English releases. So what better way than for Falcom to remake them in HD 2D, not only give them proper translations for the West, but also keep the combat system true to the original releases, and maybe even make some improvements to them, not water it down. This trilogy deserves the HD 2D treatment, so modern audiences around the globe can enjoy them. So, those are the top 10 RPGs that deserve to be remade in HD 2D? What games do you think deserve to be remade in HD 2D that I missed? And since you made it all the way to the end of this video, you might want to take a look at a video I made ranking every Cid's theme from the Final Fantasy series right here.